So today I'm going to be modeling Deku from My Hero Academia. The final episode of Season 6 is about to drop this weekend, and I thought it'd be a great chance to try out the new hair tools using hair nodes in Blender 3.5 that just came out last week. Been looking for a good excuse to use this, and I thought Deku with his big shock of green hair would be a lot of fun. So I'm going to start with some basic modeling in Nomad. He's going to look a little alien because he won't have his hair. But just going to start by blocking in the head using a sphere, cylinder for the neck, 2 spheres for the eyes, and then just using some basic typical Nomad techniques, doing some push and pull, using some clay tool here and there, and my sharp brush that I love to use, just to block in all the details of the head. While I model this, I've got a reference for Deku. Here I'm creating some other UV spheres and scaling them around. Those are going to be used to boolean into the eyes, or to cut out into the eyes his pupils. I will eventually remodel the eyes in Blender using some more standard poly tools. But here in Nomad, I don't really have that luxury, and I wanted to get the pupils in there for placement, just so I make sure I'm getting his likeness down. So I'm going to actually do this twice. I'm going to do one for the iris and then one for the pupil. So here you see I've cut in the iris, and now I'm about to cut in the pupil. In Nomad, that's simply turning off the visibility on the object you're going to cut, and then selecting both objects in the layers, and then going into your voxel menu and telling it to voxel remesh. And it should cut those things out, or voxel join them together rather. Voxel merge, I believe, might be the actual terminology. Well, you see that gives a really good placement without me even painting or anything. I've got a really good sense of how those pupils are going to look. And usually it's a really good idea to cut in the pupils this way, because it means the pupils are going to look more correct from profile if you do it that way, as opposed to it protruding along the edge of the sphere if you just painted it. It's kind of hard to explain, but your eyes actually just kind of dip in a little bit. And the more profile you get, the more you can see how that pupil is sunk into the iris. I'm going to use the tube tool to create his lashes. Even though I'm going to be using Blender for the hair and mess around with a lot of the hair tools in Blender, I want to keep his lashes and his brows just these straight up stark black tubes, just so it really reads anime. There's definitely a balance when you take something 2D and go into 3D with it. You've got to determine kind of what the best approach is to have it keep the style and the things, the appeal that you like so much about the character, but still bring in some real worldness to it. And it's tough to know exactly what to do. I like to keep the character and the eyes for like anime characters. If you're familiar with the old Ugly Sonic thing that happened when they were making the Sonic movie, they had made his eyes too small and realistic. And they eventually realized that, part of what makes Sonic who he is those big expressive eyes. So it's nice to kind of keep that appeal there. Now I'm going to go ahead and painting in the eyes. Again, nothing I'm really going to use. I just thought it's something cheap and quick to do while I get the sculpt looking right in Nomad. It's going to be hard enough without his hair to get that likeness down. To some degree, he's going to look like a crossover between Deku and Ong, or Aang. Ong, we joke about Ong because they screwed up his name in the live action movie. So shame on me for defaulting to saying that. All right, and I'm also going to be doing his little neck face mask thing that he wears. I'm just blocking that in. Again, I'll get, kind of close doing some little techniques here, but I'm going to do the final model of that in Blender simply because a lot of times hard surface things are a lot easier to model and get accurate with a poly modeler rather than something like Nomad. But that's fine. I mean, you really could do it in Nomad. You'll see once I do get to Blender, what I like to do is I'll take a piece like this and I'll model it out just poly modeling, hard surface modeling, but then I'll actually remesh it just like you would here in Nomad. I'll do like a voxel remesh and beat up the metal, and it gives it more of a forged steel look, keeping the metal, even the hard surface stuff, feeling a little bit more organic. So you can kind of get that battle worn look without things looking too clean and computer graphics looking by just sticking with a straight poly model. Nevertheless, I probably spent a little too much time modeling this Nomad. I think it was just to see maybe how good I could get it. And, I got it pretty good, but I figured out, hey, it's going to be a lot easier to get this exactly how I want it in Blender, so I didn't want to waste too much time on there. So I exported out a GLTF, opened it up in Blender, and this is what I've got. Here I'm using my Quad Remesher add-on to very quickly remesh some of the other features of him, specifically his brows. I'll also do the head, just so I can get better topology on there. It's a little bit easier to deal with. I remesh the ears. You can see Remesher really keeps the look of the sculpt, but it'll greatly reduce the amount of poly, so it makes it easier to add UVs and other things. From what I've heard, the Forger iPad app now has Z-Remesher built in, which is basically the same technology. In fact, I think it actually is the same technology as Quad Remesher. So it would have been fun to try that out, but I didn't want to overcomplicate things since I'm already going to be getting into hair on here. So I just threw on some shaders. Now I'm blocking in some light in my camera. I want to go ahead and dial these things in before I get carried away with everything, because my end goal is just one image. And so I know if I can get the lighting and camera placement all locked in the way I want it, then I will have a much easier time dialing in the look of, say, the hair and stuff. So what I'm going to do here is to apply the hair. I'm going to select all the polys on his head. I'm going to duplicate them. So I just Control D, duplicate them, and then I go to Mesh and I do Separate Selected. So by doing that, I've got a different piece of geo that's just a scalp. I split it down the middle and then told it to unwrap it, because you have to have UVs in order to use the new hair nodes. I was really comfortable with the old hair system in Blender, but this is a lot more powerful, and it comes with some differences, and one of them being you've got to have UVs. So if you just right click on the mesh, so we add the stuff to, you can go to Curves, Add, Fur, and you just start with the preset, and it creates some guides for you that you can enter sculpt mode and start moving around like I am doing here. It creates some noise and some frizz nodes that you can mess with in your modifier stack. And it also creates a node that lets you change kind of the thickness and the shape of this individual strands. I threw on the hair BSDF shader. I eventually changed that to the principled hair. This one looks pretty good, but it also has kind of a metallic look, not as natural as I'd like. So from here, it's a lot of just kind of trying different things, and in order to get the look I wanted. I did go into the asset browser. Blender 3.5 comes with some preset assets, especially for dealing with hair. And one of those is the clump hair curves, and that gives it that nice anime spiky look. Basically, these clumps of hair are all attracted in almost a point shape towards the guide curves. And you can see that makes it really easy to get that spiky anime hair look. Now this is me playing with some of the noise values in order to make it to where the spikes aren't too perfect. And here you see I've switched to the principled hair BSDF. It looks a lot softer, less metallic than the hair BSDF. And here I'm just dialing in with roughness. Some of these things you just got to play with, just scrub the values, see what you like. Here I'm going to the shader, and I'm using the curve intercept node in the shader thing into a color ramp, and that lets me control color from root to tip. Because the nodes having a little bit longer length than the guides, what I actually had to do is I had to multiply the intercept via value to make sure I was able to get the nice spread all the way from curve to tip. I realize that can be kind of confusing. I'm hoping that if anything, maybe you can pause the video at those points and kind of see those nodes. I don't I don't plan on doing an unedited version of this. I'm hoping again people can just slow things down or even play things at a really slow speed and kind of see the details of what I'm doing. A lot of what I'm doing is trial and error. Here what I did is I added another fur or hair system, and this is just to get those wild kind of stray hairs. So I've got a separate hair system just for those. And I really cranked up the frizz and the noise on those to get them kind of that scraggly look. You can see that with the lighting already set up, I've got some really strong side lights, and I've got one key light in front, and those side lights really highlight the hair, especially on a black background. I've got a blue on the right and a yellow on the left. Here I am remodeling the eyes, and you can see just through simple poly modeling, I grab polys from a UV sphere and I inset those and even extrude those. And then I scale and shape it kind of the way I want. And I can't really rotate it perfect, so I kind of just use the sculpt tools soft selection to just kind of move it up and get it into place. And I think it works here. He doesn't have to be rigged to be looking around or anything, and I think it works just fine. So now I'm going to select the individual polys and give them specific shaders, and all black for the iris, and for the pupil, I'm going ahead and UVing the pupil, and then I'm going to use texture paint to just paint in that green, similar to the way I painted it in Nomad. I'll eventually plug this same green into the emissive color of the shader a little later on as I'm dialing things in. I also make just the pupils shiny, just the iris is shiny. The pupil is all black. It's just an emissive shader turned all the way off. And I believe I turned up the metallicness on the eye shader as well, on the iris. Here I'm using the sculpting to kind of reshape his eyes. Before I do that, I have to turn off some of the mirroring I had built in. Oh, actually, sorry. What I'm actually doing here is I wanted to repose the head. So I had to, I actually deleted the left half of some of the geo and applied a mirror, and then I parented it all under the head and rotated it. Now you can see what a good job the quad remesher did on the topology on the head, and it allows me to easily select edge loops and create UV seams, which I then do a UV unwrap on the head. Since I'm not rigging it, I'm not too particular about topology. I just want a good, easy UV map. So I got that here. Now I'm going in and just sculpting some additional detail. I don't want to go overboard on this because I believe if I get too detailed, it starts to look too ugly or too real. So I like keeping kind of the simplicity of the shapes of the face. I needed to give him some more defined cheeks, so I kind of pump those out and just kind of continue to mess with the sculpt, especially now that I've reposed the head and have it exactly where I want it. I can really dial in that sculpt pretty easily. But anyways, I wanted to get a good UV map because I'm going to be using texture paint to paint in his freckles and some blush and just kind of general flesh tones. So here you can see me doing that, switching to a pinker color, and there kind of add some redness around the eyes. I'll add some redness to the nose and to the cheeks. And then I'll go in and add freckles. Deku has some really distinct freckles that happen on his cheeks and nose. You'll see a little bit later, I decided to throw a grunge map or a dirt map on top of the face so he looks a little bit more battle worn. And having a good UV map made that really easy to do. But it also kind of covers up some of the work I did on the freckles here. Now you can see that looking pretty good. I added a contrast node into the texture, into the color, just to really bring out those colors I had painted in a little bit more. And then I plug this color map into a multiply or a color mix node that multiplies it with some red orange, and plug that into subsurface color to add some redness and fleshiness to the subsurface on his face. I love subsurface scattering in Blender. I absolutely love the look of it. Here I am modeling the face, creating some asymmetry to his facial pose so it looks a little bit more interesting. So I squinted one eye a little bit. All right, now I just created some mesh circles, filled them in, and threw an emissive white shader on them to fake the anime highlights. I tried doing some other stuff with highlights kind of here and there and just was never too crazy about it. I'm not sure if I recorded that or not. I don't think I did. But ultimately, it's those bright anime highlights that really add to the character of those eyes and really draw you into the image. So I think they really work. I've seen some other artists do a similar technique. So nothing new there. Here I am continuing to play around with the hair. And now I'm going to add his scarf. I'm going to start with just a torus. And then I use soft select to kind of scale around the individual edge loops, get a good base. And then I subdivided a bunch and then hop into sculpt mode and add in the folds. Here I went ahead and remeshed, so I had a little bit more flexibility when creating kind of the raggedness of his collar. If you look at the art for Deku, he's got a really ragged looking scarf. And then I quad remeshed it. That's the great thing about quad remeshers. You can switch from a good polyprimitive into voxel remesh and then remesh it again, and you'll have decent topology. You know, I'm not rigging, so I'm not too worried about the topology being perfect, so I don't need to do any manual topology if I can avoid it. So there I use a checker shader plugged into the bump. Just to give it a little bit of cloth texture. I end up swapping that for a better cotton texture that I found on cgbookcase.com. Some really great free shaders and textures on CG Bookcase. And now I'm adding a fur system. Again, I went ahead and UV'd this after I had done the remesher. You want to make sure you remesh before you UV because the voxel remesh gives you really tough topology to UV. But if you do quad remesher, it's easy to do. So I threw a fur on there with really short fur and used the frizz node to kind of give it that nice, stray cotton fibers. And here I am remodeling the face mask, the little neck face mask, whatever it is. Simply done with a torus and using some simple polymodeling techniques. There I went through and added extra edge loops. And then I grab these kind of thinner polys and I extrude them in. I do an extrude along the normals. You can see already that gives me a much better shape. It would have kind of been a pain to try and model in Nomad, even though I was doing it. And I use some, again, soft select and just moving things around here to get the overall shape the way I want it. And then I will create some cylinders, put those into place, and I will use a Boolean modifier to cut holes where they go. But you can see just how pristine and CG perfect this face mask is looking at this point. So once I get it the way I like it, I will eventually throw a remesh, a voxel remesh on it. And this, I'll go in with a scrape tool and sharp brush and just really kind of ding it out, make it look battle worn. I'm constantly going through and reshaping the hair as I build out this image. The hair is kind of the star of this image. Here, I messed around with adding a glow sphere and some fog. And the fog, I loved. The glow sphere, I didn't. So what I ended up doing is, I think I even lost this fog, and I just use a point light. So here you see I got a point light, which really highlights that hair. Just crank the intensity of that point light behind his head. And then I added a fog node to the scenes, to the scene properties. So, and you can see just how beautifully it disperses the light around the back of him. Then I added some depth field to the camera. Here I'm blocking in a mesh for the body just to cover up kind of the bottom of the frame. You can see it doesn't look like a body in the other view, but as long as I got those shoulders looking good in the camera view, that's all that mattered to me. Here you can see I'm bringing in the cotton shader from CG Bookcase. I'm having to scale it down using a mapping node and rotate it around. And it looks a lot better that way than what I had on the checkers. I took the face mask and rotated it to where it wasn't perfectly centered, so it looks a little. It creates a little bit more of a pose to him, even though he's straight on. It actually makes his body feel a little turned and a lot more interesting that way. I'm grabbing a metal texture I grabbed off of CG Bookcase. I'm plugging that in appropriately. I use color ramp nodes to tweak kind of contrast on different textures, so you see those in there. Mostly on color, but also on roughness. And you can see that my UVs aren't really, I don't really have any good UVs there. So I decided rather than do the UVs, this is the part where I need to go in, voxel remesh, and start adding the battle damage. I'm using scrape tool, the sharp brush tool. It's actually called draw sharp. This is kind of where I got the idea to use a sharp brush in Nomad, is because how much I would use it in Blender and ZBrush. You can see just how much cooler that looks, adding that battle damage. I then took an ambient occlusion node. I already have it in there, and I have that plugged in so it darkens up those crevices on the shader. Here I took my wild hairs and I cranked the density. I wanted more of those wild hairs in there and mess with the noise a little bit more. All right, and here you can see I've gotten some grunge maps. I don't remember if I got these from CG Bookcase or where they came from, but I throw a mapping node in there, and I'm just trying different grunge maps that I have using a color ramp node to increase the contrast. And I plug that all into a mixed shader node, and that shader node just goes to a diffuse, this kind of a ruddy reddish brown. So where it's not his skin, it's showing that ruddy reddish brown with the mixed shader. And then I'm adding a noise, really fine noise, and plugging that into a bump map on his face to give his skin that kind of porous feel where the light really hits it. And you'll notice in the final image on the left side, you can really feel those pores. It really adds a lot, I think. So I decided I want to add in a hand, and you'll notice I didn't really have to sculpt the hand because this is a hand that I used and posed for a Power Glove model a long while back, and you can find that in my Instagram. And I was like, that's basically the pose I want. But I went ahead and used Sculpt tool, drew some face sets, and used the pose brush to kind of change the pose just slightly to pull those fingers in, get them the way I want. I don't want the hand to cover up too much of the face, but I do want it to add some visual interest and, again, break the symmetry of the image as a whole. So here I'm painting out the fingernails, or not painting them out, but I'm smoothing them out with my Sculpt brush, going in with my sharp brush and the scrape tool to really define the form and kind of make it a little bit blockier where the hand is. And finally, I'll go in with the sharp brush and the clay tool, and I'll add in some nice wrinkles and folds. He's wearing a glove eventually. I started off using that same cotton shader that I'm using for the scarf. And then I realized, you know what, he probably has more like leathery gloves. So I got a leather shader off of CG Bookcase. And it was a red leather, but I just pulled off the hue saturation on the color and tweaked the contrast on it. Here you can see with that sharp brush, adding the seams down the middle. And when you see the cartoon and you see his gloves, they usually draw these seams on the gloves too. It just makes for some really interesting, smaller detail in the glove. And they're using just the different Sculpt tools to get some folds around where the glove would naturally bend and have those folds. So here I've got that cotton shader on. I'm not too crazy with it. It looks really silly when I go into the workbench mode because it's just showing that cotton image as a whole wrapped around it without any of the shader changes I have. So ignore that. It just looks funny. It looks like he's wearing this big quilted glove in the workbench mode. All right, and here's where I wanted to add the peach fuzz to his face. So like I have pores on his face, I also wanted to try adding some peach fuzz. So I added a fur to his whole face, but I needed a way to control the density because I didn't want fur on his forehead or on his nose. I really just wanted around his cheekbone. And so I was hoping I would be able to do that with a vertex group, but you can't really do it with a vertex group in geometry nodes without really diving into the nodes, which I don't really, I'm not too interested in doing. So the easiest way was actually to take the UV map of the head and just paint a black and white image. So I just go into texture paint mode and I paint white where I want the peach fuzz. And you see I've got a little bit of mustache on there, just normally where a beard might grow. And then I plug that into the density mask. I had to add a generate hair curves node to that node stack. For some reason, when you create the hair nodes in Blender, by default, it automatically generates curves, and I couldn't find any control for that. I'm not really sure why that is or where that is, but I found I could just go into the asset browser and throw a generate hair curves node into the stack and just put it at the top of the stack. And from there, I could define where that mask was, and I can also define the length and a few other factors there that for some reason just seem to be hidden if you just throw on the fur node. I'm not really sure. Maybe someone who's watching this might know and could put some info in the comments below. Here I wanted to deepen the mouth a bit more, so I'm doing that with sculpting, but I also do it with the texture. I found a little bit better success kind of painting a deeper red in the texture, and you'll see in order to get that to stand out more. And just resculpting the folds in his scarf, constantly just reassessing things as I get closer and closer to the final image. And we are getting really close here. So here I am painting a deeper tone inside the mouth. It's hard to get to there, but if you go into the 2D mode, it's really easy to see where that's painted and clean it up. Constantly just dialing things in, continuing to tweak hair, this and that. This was the peach fuzz, was giving me a little bit of trouble, and it was because the frizz node, or no, it was the surface. It was the surface deform node that's thrown at the bottom. For some reason, that was creating an offset on his face, and I realize why now, but at the time I couldn't figure it out. It's because when I created the asymmetry in the face, I actually did that in a blend shape because I didn't want to mess up the original. In case I had screwed it up, I could always go back. But that blend shape causes my surface deform node to not behave properly. And basically it made it to where his peach fuzz was outside of his face. It wasn't attached to his face. So the simple solve was I just took the surface deform node and turned that off. This is basically it. Now I'm going to show you the final image. Here it is. You can also check it out on my Instagram. Really happy with the way this one turned out and really looking forward to the final episode of Season 6 this weekend. If you guys like this video and want to see more, please like, comment, subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one.